Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me one quick favor, see that little black subscribe button on the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, hit that little black subscribe button. Really does help this channel grow, my audience grow, and I appreciate it more than you know. Also, quick thank you to our presenting sponsor, Betfred Sportsbook and the Betfred Sportsbook app. Bet $50 on any game. Get up to $1,111 in free bets courtesy of the Betfred Sportsbook. Thank you again. Now, here's the video that you came here for. With that said, let's not waste any more time. Let's jump right into it. The Week 3 slate in college football. And as I said, on paper, it doesn't seem great, but I have a feeling we're going to come out of Saturday with a lot of interesting storylines, a lot of interesting narratives. And I do want to start with, it might not be a great game on paper this year, but it is a great rivalry, a lot of bad blood. Let's start with Tennessee at Florida. Tennessee, a 6.5-point favorite going into the Swamp. The over-under set at 58.5. And an interesting little nugget on this one. For everybody who's ready to just hand this game to Tennessee. You know that Tennessee hasn't won in the Swamp since 2003? 20 years Tennessee has not won in the Swamp. So this one should be fun. This one should be competitive. And I actually think we're going to learn a lot about both teams. From the Tennessee perspective, by now, you know what the narrative coming into the season is and was, and what the narrative coming out of this game will be. Was last year a fluke? Was last year about Hendon Hooker? Or is Josh Heupel building a program that gets sustained year over year over year? To Tennessee's credit, they are 2-0. But obviously, this is the game where we're going to learn a lot about Joe Milton. And as much as the conversation is about Tennessee, it is also about Joe Milton. Who is he? How good is he? And how is he going to handle the big stage? It's one thing to do it against Austin Peay or even Virginia, but we saw it at Michigan. We saw it early in his career at Tennessee. How does he respond? Big game, big road game, all that good stuff. Now, to Joe Milton's credit, he's actually been very good early on in the season. Again, the competition hasn't been great, Virginia and Austin Peay, but he has shown you what you want to see from him. In that first game over Virginia, and Virginia is a program that is in the ACC. They do recruit pretty well. Joe Milton was excellent, 21 of 30, 200 yards passing, 2 touchdowns. And as a guy who watched that game, there was a couple guys that just dropped balls that did not help Joe Milton's final stat line. Obviously, last week against Austin Peay, they really didn't show all of that much. But it's also worth noting that as good as Joe Milton has looked early, the run game has also been really good. And this is something we talked about on this show last year, the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast, is that everyone thinks of Tennessee as this high-powered, fast-paced, offense, high-flying, whatever. But the run game is crucial to what they do. And through the first couple games, that run game has been very, very, very good. Over 200 yards rushing against Austin Peay last week. And I understand it's Austin Peay. But as a theme of this show today, you can only play the teams on your schedule. And if you take care of business in the manner in which you want to see people take care of business, that's always a good thing. It wasn't a great game last week for Tennessee, a little sloppy, a lot of penalties, all of that. But the run game was effective, and Jalen Wright has been excellent early in the year. It's early, but the second leading rusher in the SEC. From the Florida perspective, listen, Florida is interesting because to me, what I think about Florida, I think I'm the only person in America that I'm kind of neutral on Billy Napier. I don't think he's shown me a lot. I don't think that we need to blindly have faith in him, but there are positives. He's recruited pretty well. The class of 2024 is shaping up to be really good, but this is kind of a big game for him, right? I mean, you look at Florida's schedule, you look at all of the games that they still have ahead. Already lost to Utah, have to play at LSU later this year. Florida State, their big rival, appears to be rolling. We know about Georgia. I'm not saying this is a must-win to get bowl eligible, but it's kind of sort of a must-win, and it kind of sort of is a bad look if in front of 100,000 people in the Swamp, you cannot get a victory over Tennessee for the first time in 2 decades. Now, the one thing I will say about Florida, independent of win, lose, whatever, first off, like I said, this is a big game for them. A lot to prove in terms of putting week 1 behind us. Week 1, obviously, they lost at Utah. Last week, they took care of McNeese State. I will say this about the Utah game, though. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. I went back and watched a little bit of it, and I get Utah did not have Cam Rising. I get that they didn't have their best defensive lineman, Junior Tafuna. I get that one of their best linebackers, Kareem Reed, got hurt early in the game, excuse me. But at the same time, if you actually go back and look at that game, I don't think it was quite as one-sided as we remember. Now, the final score was 24-11. Utah got control early and never really gave it up. But if you go back and look, Florida had a million penalties. Now, that's not excusable. A couple really dumb ones. The situation where they had the two players with the same number on the field. Lot of penalties. Graham Mertz had an interception deep in Florida, deep in his own territory, which set up a Utah touchdown. But the bottom line is that Florida actually outgained Utah at home, and it was their own mistakes which ultimately did them in. Not to say that Utah did not deserve to win. Not to say that Utah wasn't the better team. But I also don't think Florida was that far off from making that at least an interesting game, a competitive game. Again, I get that there was no Cam Rising. I get that a lot of injuries were going on from the Utah perspective. But we've seen some butt kickings by other teams to SEC teams this year, whether it's Florida State smacking LSU, whether it's, Miami smacking A&M. I don't think that Florida absolutely got destroyed. And so that's why I think this is a big game. You're at home. We know that Graham Mertz is limited. The run game, though, has largely been very effective early. Florida, again, it's hard to say because the competition was not good last week, but they were able to effectively run the ball. I think that running back room is probably their best unit, on the team. Montrell Johnson with over 100 yards rushing last week. Trevor Etienne had a very good game as well. And then I also think from the Florida perspective, and again, knowing that they played a banged up Utah in week 1 and McNeese State in week 2, the defense has actually been pretty good. And again, we just talked about it from the Utah perspective. We talked about the fact that Utah was very banged up for the 5th time this segment. But do you know that Florida right now has the number 1 total defense in the SEC right now going on this season? Like in the SEC right now, this second, Florida has the number 1 total defense. Again, they haven't played a Texas. They haven't played a Florida State. They haven't even played a Miami. I get that. But they're not as bad as you think, which leads me to my thoughts on this game. And I do have a pick on this game. I do have a bet at the very least on this game. I actually like the under in this game a lot. And I know it's not sexy, and I know you don't come into this show, I want to bet the under. I hope I get a 10-7 final score. And I don't think we're going to get a 10-7 final score. But what I do think about this game, when I look at it, a couple things stand out. Florida, as I said, they want to run the ball and control the clock. Billy Napier even said that in his press conference this week. He said, that tempo that they play with, it's mortifying. And if you let them get going, you can get buried in a hurry. So Florida is going to want to control the clock. And I don't necessarily believe that Tennessee is going to play at the normal tempo that we're used to. This is a program. Yes, they like to play fast. Yes, they like to get to the line of scrimmage, run plays, do this, do that. But I don't think Josh Heupel wants to put too much on the shoulders of Joe Milton in what should be likely, frankly, the toughest road environment that he's ever played in. Remember, hasn't really played the last 2 years at Tennessee. I know he started early in his career and then was replaced by Hendon Hooker. I know he started in the Orange Bowl last year, but that was obviously a neutral site game. But you go back to the Michigan year when he started. Remember, that was the COVID year. There were no fans in the stands in the Big Ten. So I just bring it up to say, I don't think Josh Heupel wants to put too much on his plate early. And I do think the under is the smart play. This feels like a 28-20 type game, 24-20 type game. Don't think either team is going to be in, bottom line, I don't know that I love either side. I would probably lean Florida plus the points at home, but I think the under is the smart play here. That is my official best bet for Florida, Tennessee.